Welcome back to the Fishing Daily podcast. Today I'm joined by Mike Cohen, CEO of the National Federation of Fishermen's Organisations, and we'll be here to talk about such issues as the perception of bottom trawling. But one we'll start off with is the EU-UK fisheries deal. And Mike, thank you for joining me here today.
Thanks very much. Glad to be here.
Mike, what's your organisation and its members' perspective of the government's decision to maintain the status quo of the EU Trade and Cooperation Agreement until 2038?
Yeah, I mean, huge disappointment, really. From our perspective, this was an opportunity for us that we hoped government would take to bring some benefit to our membership, to fishermen in the UK. And it chose not to. It's been particularly galling for me over the last few weeks to hear politicians, government in particular, sort of criticising people in the fishing industry for not being happy with this deal and saying, we've got to move on. We've got to go to the future. We have to stop living in the past with this. Well, of course, what we were asking for was to move on. What government has done is revert to a deal that was first done something like 1973. We've gone back to the past where British waters and European waters are one. European boats and British boats kind of mingle and fish there. And that I entirely understand why. If I was in doing this job in France or in Belgium or in Ireland, I'd probably be very happy with this deal, but I'm not. I understand why they would want to continue this deal. It's been a very good deal for 50 plus years. But my job is here for my members here. And we stood to gain something from using the right of access to UK waters in the way that Norway does access to its waters to bring benefit to its fishing industry, its fishermen and its coastal communities. And we've given that away for nothing very tangible. For what? Government has said this was in return for a sanitary phytosanitary agreement. Well, of course it wasn't, because we haven't got an SPS agreement. We've got an agreement to start talks in order to hopefully reach an agreement within some quite prescribed terms that aren't very beneficial to the UK. And frankly, if that's what they consider doing a good deal, I worry about what sort of deal they're going to do on an SPS agreement, because they're not covering themselves in glory so far. So I think we got next to nothing for the nation, and an SPS agreement benefits the EU just as it benefits the UK, obviously. It brings no benefit to the fishing industry, and it gives back something that we had. So yeah, it's a huge failure from the UK government and their attitude towards our industry for not tugging the forelock and being grateful to them for taking away something we were promised has been pretty shameful, really.
Yeah, and when you look at some of the ministers are saying it's a great deal because you're getting access back to the markets in Europe, where beforehand there was veterinary checks and everything else coming on the fish being transported. But it doesn't seem is it going to benefit the fishing industry, or is it going to benefit the manufacturers of farmed salmon or something like that more than you?
I mean, it will benefit the aquaculture sector more than the wild capture sector for sure. Or even though the Prime Minister said in Parliament that we couldn't export shellfish before, of course we could export shellfish. We couldn't export live bivalve mollusks that hadn't been depurated. It's a little bit more niche than shellfish, but shows how depressingly little our politicians understand about the things they make deals on. So it will certainly benefit the live bivalve industry, and that's good for them. But again, my job is to my members, and we represent the wild capture sector. For us, it's possible that the producers who buy catch from British boats, processors should have said, who process it and sell that to Europe may get a better price. It's possible that the exporters may reduce, or not get a better price, but have fewer costs on export. It's possible that they may pass them on down the supply chain. On the other hand, I'm already hearing importers saying they expect to pay less if export costs for us are lowered. They expect to be buying for less. European consumers would have every right to expect to pay less for a product that it's now cheaper to import. And a couple of exporters I've spoken to have said, look, we pass on savings if we get them, but honestly, I might save £2 on a box of fish. By the time a wagon load, maybe £200 on a whole wagon full, maybe £2 a box. If I can pass that down and get a better price to the catchers, Maybe, but there's a lot of bits of the supply chain that's got to go through, and everybody could do with saving some money right now. So honestly, £2 by the time that filters all the way back down to the guy in oilskins, the best will in the world, that's going to be nothing, isn't it? So no, it's not true to say that this will benefit the catching sector. Some benefits to aquaculture, yes, but I'm not an aquaculture association, so for us, no benefit. And it's the thing that could have benefited us that's been traded away. And all of that is, of course, assuming that we actually do an export deal, because we haven't even started talking on that, at least not publicly yet.
In your view, what was the factors that led to this outcome?
I don't know, and that we would love to know. I'd love to know if the UK actually tried to get a better deal, or if they just offered up fisheries access in return for a quick deal. What struck me as quite startling was the speed that this was reached. We were talking to cabinet office ministers just a few weeks before this deal was done, and we were told that this key date, when it was 19th of May, was when the talks would start with Europe. We will start then. This will be the first meeting. Everything's still to play for. No deals are done. We'll be starting to talk then, and things will develop. And then, of course, on the day, well, the press were announcing the deal was done before the summit had even started. So the date at which we were told was the starting gun was the end. It was done very, very quickly. The reason for that, I don't know. I know that the Prime Minister was very keen to announce how skillful his trade negotiation was for completing deals with India, the US, and the EU all in a few weeks. So maybe there was an element of trying to demonstrate the government's prowess at trade negotiations. Although, as we've seen since, all of those were agreements to agree, or partial agreements, or had lots still to be done. For whatever reason, we did it in a tearing hurry. We gave away fisheries access. And we are looking at how the government has done that. It isn't actually linked to anything else. That's just an agreement made to give up access for 12 years. It isn't linked to any change in terms of the TCA. It's being done as an administrative matter through the Specialised Committee on Fisheries. So this is, suddenly we discover that a kind of committee of middle-ranking UK and EU civil servants have now been given the power to bind their respective governments to allow access to national territories. That's quite unusual, isn't it? There's no parliamentary oversight. Nobody's seen the terms and conditions of this. This is just being given. This has been given away. There is no quid pro quo because it isn't tied to a change in the TCA. So anything the government said it's got, well, it has a handshake and a nod and a nice press conference where Europe says it will start talks on an SPS agreement, but we haven't actually tied it to any sort of legal agreement. There's no treaty involved. This is being done as an administrative decision. So it's been done in a tearing hurry in the most bare bones, behind the scenes way possible. And that gives me grave concerns about what will actually be the outcome of any of the other parts of this deal, if we can even call it that.
It's a situation where the fishermen were promised that in 2026 there would be a renegotiation of the deal. It's a little bit more than a betrayal. It's verging on nearly illegal, isn't it?
It's hugely challenging. I mean, the terms of the TCA that we had before said that in 2026 access will be decided annually. So we varied those terms without changing the treaty itself by saying that this Civil Service Committee has the power to make that decision. But this is why I start by saying I'm so annoyed by the way government portrays this as us trying to go back to the past and we aren't willing to move forward. Actually, we had an agreement that said that access will be annually negotiated from 2026, and we reverted back to that 1970s agreement for kind of free access again. We gave away that tool in our arsenal to negotiate with, that tool that Norway uses to a very, very good effect, to a devastating effect on the UK's distant waters fleet. When our negotiators failed so badly after Brexit in the talks with Norway. So we gave that away for nothing other than a promise to talk about something unrelated at some unknown point in the future. And that's a really bitter pill to swallow.
Yeah, it's very much a case that the UK is on the outside looking in at the EU, and the EU's has centered their power again and taken the fishing from the fleet.
That's how it looks from this side of the channel, certainly. And it's how, the preconditions around any SPS deal are framed very much in that. The UK can observe but not contribute to committees discussing that. It will be subject to the European Court of Justice. The UK can make its own rules, but if they are less beneficial to European businesses than Europe's rules, then they don't apply to European businesses. We've, even the preconditions before starting talks on an SPS agreement pretty much signal a capitulation from the UK in return for, hopefully, some reduction in export costs for a few people. As we've already seen, and quite rightly, European importers and consumers are already saying, well, will we expect to share in the benefit of that? So it's quite hard to see an upside in that from our perspective, from an industry perspective, and frankly, from a UK perspective. We don't seem to have bought much beyond a promise to start talks.
Yeah, and once again, at the UN Ocean Conference, you've seen the government making commitments above and beyond what it should be doing. And it's, we're going to talk about now, we'll be talking about David Attenborough's Ocean documentary. And, the bottom trawling fleet has recently received a lot of negative attention from the public because of this documentary. From the industry's perspective, what is the factual accuracy of the portrayals of bottom trawling, including those showing impacts of vulnerable marine areas such as coral reefs being trawled?
Absolutely. I mean, it's shocking stuff that's portrayed in that film. It's a great piece of entertainment. It has a clear narrative and it meets it really well. And it has its kind of recreation of what we think trawling would look like. And everybody's, even intelligent people who have known for a long time, are utterly convinced that this is what's happening. I'm not entirely sure where that trawling footage was mocked up. We possibly have heard Turkey in an unfished area to maximize the damage caused by dragging this bar across the seabed and saying that's how fishing operates. And people believe that this is reality. It's, that's the narrative that they wanted to portray. They did it very, very well. They obviously didn't speak to anybody in industry. They didn't consider what modern beam trawling looks like. They didn't look at innovations like the new semi-pelagic trawls that more people are using, that don't consider that fishermen fish in areas where they fished for a very, very long time before, because that's where fish will be found. The general portrayal of the industry has been shocking, and the vilification of fishermen and the fishing industry for carrying out an activity that they've done for generations in places that they're permitted to do it, in a licensed activity that's incredibly heavily regulated and monitored. The degree to which government has turned on us in order to win praise in the short term is astonishing. As though we have never been involved with government, although government has never taken an interest in where and when and how trawling takes place. And of course it does. This is a regulated activity. But it has garnered political attention. It's an easy win with its supporters for a party of government that has thrown away its support in record time by attacking farmers, attacking older people, by doing everything it can seemingly to annoy multiple sectors of the population and lose its support. It's a quick win to demonize people who operate small businesses and have no ability, no power to talk back. Astonishing that we have a public consultation launched with quotes from the American-owned lobbying organization Oceana on DEFRA's website, calling for people to respond to the consultation by demanding a whole site closure to trawling. DEFRA's website has American NGOs announcing government policy. The Secretary of State announced this move the day before he gave his speech on a Sunday via a newspaper and the social media feeds of environmental NGOs, the big corporate NGOs, utterly blindsiding industry and utterly ignoring the fact that we've been talking to DEFRA for a long time about a measured, features-based, evidence-informed approach to marine conservation. That went out the window so that there could be a big splash in Nice about banning trawling across all of these sites. And however much DEFRA wants to tell us that this will be evidence-based and this will be a process that looks at the features in question. We cannot get around the fact that the Secretary of State has said we will ban trawling across all of these sites. The leader of the Labour Party, the leader of the House in the Commons last week said this government will ban trawling in protected areas. They clearly prejudged the outcome of the consultation. It is very, very hard to have faith in this being any sort of a genuine consultation with industry when 2 cabinet ministers have already told us what the outcome will be. And the idea that we are consulting the public, and as in the words of DEFRA's own press release, they would like the public to get in touch and tell us what you feel about this issue. We're past, in DEFRA's eyes, looking at facts and the truth. The feelings of people who don't know very much about it beyond what they've seen in a film designed to draw attention to something and away from the things that its funders get involved in. That's how we are governing the country now. It's astonishing.
The government's been ruled by social media, and the idea that, what you call that, the more thumbs up that they get for the things that they say is actually policy.
Yeah, astonishing, isn't it? We appear to be governing for clicks, which is just mind-blowing. But at the end of the day, you can't eat likes on social media. We still need to produce food through something. And the organized kind of attempts to demonize bottom trawling now will turn to something else next. You know, there's the people campaigning against this, the organizations that have thrown millions into this campaign and the funders that have thrown millions into making things about this. It's a business model. Clearly, their business model attracts huge amounts of funding. I know we had adverts around banning fishing. A colleague was in Nice and saying there were advertising hoardings promoting Stephen Fry's latest attack on the fishing industry, sponsored by Dolce & Gabbana, I think it was, and Talisker Whiskey. You can get good money from big companies to throw out a few insults at fishermen from celebrities who've never had the decency to speak to anybody in the fishing industry or ask if what they're parroting is actually true. That's a good business model. And if they manage to ban trawling, well, they still want to make money, so they'll turn to something else. So everybody who, anybody who thinks they can kind of keep their head down and think, well, it's just the trawlers for now, we're fine. It's for now. They'll come for you next, because once you've banned bottom trawling, and obviously bottom trawling isn't anything like as damaging as it's being portrayed, as everybody in the fishing industry and all the fishery scientists who actually work on this stuff have been at pains to say, nothing like as damaging. It isn't indiscriminate. It doesn't have the seabed impact that's being pretended. Once we do this, if we ban bottom trawling, and when we realize that that doesn't actually make the sea any healthier in most of these places, if we still want to make the sea healthier, then we still need to do something else. And if you are dependent for your income persuading big companies that would like to greenwash their profits to give you some cash to make a film, well, the sea will still need something doing to it. So we're going to have to campaign to ban something else. So anybody even vaguely associated with the industry who thinks if we keep your head down, they'll just go for the trawlers, wants to be very, very careful. Some of those bans and some of those MPAs are targeting netters and even potting in places. Other fisheries will be next. Other areas will be next, because this isn't based on science or rationality. It's based on, exactly as you said, it's based on social media likes. And that's very dangerous for anybody outside those who have the money to pay for these sorts of campaigns to be run.
It also seems to be the government's idea and the previous government's idea that by creating more marine protected areas, it will compensate for the damage that offshore wind will do. And we recently seen here in Ireland where the government has admitted that there will be noise pollution, underwater noise pollution, caused by these wind turbines that could possibly upset some fish species living in the area. That's a concern as well for the fishing industry, that the spatial squeeze is that even if you would survive the next round or this round of pushing out bottom trawling, then where does the fleet take themselves once there's nowhere left to go fishing?
Absolutely right. Yeah, I mean, 3 years ago now, the NFFO and the Scottish Fishing Federation, we funded a report into spatial squeeze. It was well received. It's been referenced several times in parliamentary debate, and it analysed the potential impact on, it in fact looked at the trawl fleet as an exemplar of being excluded from various areas. It looked at a variety of different scenarios under which trawling might have to operate in the future. And what's shocking to me now is just barely 3 years later, our worst case scenario now looks laughably naive, ridiculously over-optimistic. We're getting calls to ban fishing in this first set of MPAs, government saying it will ban trawling across all protected areas. Well, 38% of the UK's seas are protected in one way or another. We have massive protected areas designated largely so that we could meet a spatial target without any very great consideration, with very little evidence. In some cases, no evidence even that the fragile features exist in these places. With that amount of the sea protected, with the Crown Estate's proposal to develop 10% of the UK EEZ industrially for energy production, with the government's promise that environmental harm done by offshore wind will be offset by creating new MPAs, and the only management measure they've suggested for those MPAs is a ban on fishing activity. We are looking at a spatial squeeze beyond anything I think that our industry can cope with in anything like its present form. We have to bear in mind the damage done not just physically to the sea by all of these activities, but to coastal communities and to the industry in the long term. Wind farms last 20, maybe 25 years at the outside before they stop operations. And what then? What do we do if we've damaged the seabed across 10% of the UK EEZ to be industrialised? It's astonishing. And we've also got rid of a fishing fleet. We won't be able to get that back, even if we move on to the next thing in 20 years' time and generate electricity in a different means, which we'll have to because the turbines won't still be turning. Even then, you can't assume that fishing will come back because we'll have lost the skill, we'll have lost the boats, we'll have lost the knowledge that enables them to operate. And those coastal communities will be getting more and more depopulated and run down. The point now for government is to make some long-term strategic decisions for how it wants to use the sea, but it's failing to do that by simply treating everything piecemeal, by having new wind farm licensing rounds, by making sudden announcements on offshore conservation, none of which links together, none of which ties together with its fisheries management plan program, its regional marine plans. None of these are linked to one another. We seem to constantly think we can just live from election to election and do things that will be popular now. There's no strategic thought in how we're using the sea, and that is going to come back and bite us much sooner than people realise.
One of the big catchphrases in recent years has been mental health, and how worried the government is about people's mental health. And yet now the mental health of the fishing communities and coastal communities along England and Scotland and Wales and wherever they're putting these offshore wind farms is not taken into effect at all. There's been absolutely no consultation on the fact is how will this impact you? There's a public perception and there's a public consultation, and people in London and Manchester and Leeds and where not will have a say in that, but there's no say on what it's going to do for coastal communities where you look out and your horizons are broken, your jobs are taken.
Yeah.
How does that make you feel?
I'm really worried about that. You've hit on a thing that's been a big topic of conversation in the NFFO for a while now. There's two parts to this, aren't there? There's there's benefits to coastal communities of what's being done, and it's constantly being touted how much benefit offshore wind is going to bring, as though there's some sort of big population of unemployed wind farm engineers just kind of hanging around in Whitby waiting for somebody to come and start. What nonsense. I've worked alongside offshore wind for a good number of years, 12 or 15 years now. Developers tend to it's a highly skilled job. They bring engineers from project to project, usually from outside of the UK. They fly into one project, they build, they go on to the next. This isn't creating a sustainable industry in those locations. Grimsby is the biggest offshore wind operations and maintenance hub in the world outside of China, and it's the poorest town in Britain, and it's getting poorer. millions and millions invested. I remember when the local development fund gave Ørsted, or Dong Energy as they were then, gave them £1 million to put their headquarters in, as though Ørsted, which has quarterly profits in the billions, needed to be given development funds for one of the most deprived places in the country to stick its headquarters in Grimsby and then employ Danes who flew home every Friday to Copenhagen to come and work there. It isn't helping the people it should help. The promise that this industry is going to regenerate coastal communities is not being seen. We are not seeing jobs in these places, but we are displacing an industry that's been there for centuries and more in some places in order to make room for it. So what does that do to coastal communities if you take away skilled work from multiple small local businesses that employ people on land as well as at sea? Brilliant piece of work done, commissioned by the Cornish Fish Producers Organisation on the true value of seafood in Cornwall, by an economist called Jim Plunkett-Cole. Fantastic read, and really breaks down what it means to have a seafood industry in Cornwall. He found 12 jobs on land for every job on the deck of a boat. By the time you take into account everybody from unloading the catch, from marketing it, working in the market, from jobs with buyers, jobs with processors, jobs in retail, jobs in the hospitality sector, based on the idea that having a thriving seafood industry drives people to go to restaurants that sell them, and all of those things, hugely valuable. Cornwall's maybe a bit of an outlier because they've got a really strong mixed fishery, but also they've really got a well-integrated tourist sector that draws people in and shows them the benefits of having fishing there. All of that's tied together, and you start chipping away at fishing, you start to lose all of it. I always like to point out, when I ran the Fishermen's Association in Bridlington years ago, Brid is a very deprived part of the UK, bottom 5% for bottom 5% for social deprivation in the UK, parts of Bridlington. If you go on a sunny summer day to Bridlington Harbour, it is absolutely rammed with people buying fish and chips and candy floss and going on the rides. They're all clustered around the harbour watching the boats unload. And I would fight my way out of my office on the quayside, go around in the corner into town to buy a sandwich at lunchtime, and town was empty. People came to Bridlington in really big numbers to hang around the harbour and the beach, and they liked to watch the boats in their hundreds every day. If you lose that, if you have an empty harbour with a few yachts bobbing about next to a pontoon, you will take a lot away from town beyond just all of those jobs on all the dozens of boats that are there. So we run a huge risk of all of these measures that will damage fishing without government ever having assessed the impact in that knock-on fashion. And then linked to that, so you've got that economic problem, that struggle. If you're not earning and you're not able to pay your rent, you're going to have to move somewhere else and look for a different kind of work. And then local shops struggle, and schools close, and GPs move away, and everything gets worse. We've seen that in other areas where key industries disappear. And then what does that do for the mental health of the people who are left behind in those communities, and especially fishermen who have not just lost the ability to carry out the only profession they've ever had, and which gives meaning and value and dignity to what they do. It's highly skilled and they are highly expert in it. And having that taken away in itself is devastating. But then there's the fear of what that does for your family. And I've been badgering ministers about this recently with the way they're happy to demonize trawlermen in this current consultation. You're talking about not just taking away their ability to make a living right now, then you're potentially saddling them with a boat with a big mortgage on it that they can't sell because nobody else can fish with it either. And what do you tell those guys then? So not only have I taken away your only way of making a livelihood, I've also put you massively in debt with no ability to tackle that through no fault of your own, because you've just been doing something that we license you to do and promote. What does that do to people? One of the things that I found most disappointing, most upsetting over the last week is the number of people who have called me to say that when I'm speaking to government next, will I please ask for funding for a decommissioning scheme? Because that's the only way they can see of getting out of this with something intact, without saddling themselves with just impossible debt. And that is a terrible place to be in. I do not want to be asking ministers, cap in hand, for some money to stop my members being left destitute by their policies. I want to be talking about what government, this government came to power talking about growth and how they were going to target economic growth in deprived areas as an engine to push Britain forwards. And now I'm having to say, well, your policies, never mind growth, your policies are going to cause an industry to shrink and they're going to be devastating to businesses. Please, please, can we have some money so that people are not left with less than nothing because of what you've decided to do? And that is a terrible place to be in.
Yeah, there's a lot of investment and getting yourself into the fishing industry, especially when you become a boat owner. What about this 360 million Fishing and Coastal Growth Fund? What's your take on that?
Um, it's hard. Look, I don't want to sound too glum about everything because that's a, you know, that's something, isn't it? That's definitely something. But at the risk of sounding too ungrateful, I believe it when I see it. £360 million over 12 years, £30 million a year. 12 years is at least 2 general elections. God knows how many government spending reviews. Does anybody really think £360 million is going to survive all of that? I'd love to think it would. That would be great. And great to think that the next 2 governments, and it's hard to see that they're likely to be the same one, given the popularity of the current one we have. The subsequent government's really going to honour that spending commitment? I don't know. If we get that money, if it's well targeted at the catching sector, at activities that will promote growth, then it's really positive. If we get that trickled out at £30 million a year, if it gets taken away after the next lot of spending reviews or departmental reorganisations, if it's tied to the usual Treasury rules of annual financial year cycles so that projects can't last longer than a year, have to be put together in a hurry, if the speed at which they're made available means that the big organised professional grant getters get all the money and the small businesses that are the best potential for growth don't get anywhere near it. If it goes on schemes that are only peripherally attached to the fishing sector, then this is not going to achieve what it should. And, you know, I've been around long enough to remember the European Fisheries Fund and the European Maritime and Fisheries Fund and the old flag programs. I used to sit on the flag board in the Holderness area and getting bids in for local authorities for new street lighting or decorative fencing on the seafront from the Fisheries Fund, or to have to fund an artist to paint watercolours of fishermen at work to hang in the town hall. Really, we're going to pay somebody to paint a picture of somebody working for a living so they can hang in a council office. And that's what they want to use the Fisheries Fund for. If we fritter it away on things like that, like previous funds have done, then this will achieve nothing. If this is tightly bounded to growth in the catching sector, then there's some potential here. But £30 million for the whole of the UK doesn't go very, very far. So yeah, we'll wait and see. The devil is in the details.
Well, where would you like to see that growth coming in and the English fishing industry, if the funding is there available for it?
Yeah, so there's lots of things we could look at doing that. I would love to see something done to improve recruitment and training of young people into the industry, something that will give us a future. I'd love it to look at shoreside facilities that will make vessels more economic to operate. It's thinking smart about things that will bring benefit across the fleet rather than just you can do things and grants for equipment or engine replacements or things for particular boats, and they are good. But we need some really strategic thinking again. Like what can you do that will benefit a whole port? Getting young people into the industry, making it easier for them, that will benefit everybody in the long term if crew are available. Doing things that will make ports better places to work, safer and more economical to operate in, that will help whole numbers of people, help with marketing the catch to open up new markets and create new economic opportunities with the existing catch. We've lost the easiest way to bring economic benefit to the fishing industry in the UK by granting continued access to our territorial waters. That's the easiest thing you could have done would be to exclude non-UK boats from territorial waters within 12 miles and allow the inshore fleet some space to operate, start to catch other species, even just start space to spread out. It's certainly looking down the English coast, it's mostly static gear operating in that area. People will be freer to operate their gear without risk of it getting towed away. They'd save costs in damaged gear. They'd be able to expand a bit. Stocks would be easier to manage. We've given that easiest thing away, so we're going to have to think quite cannily about that. But the potential is there. We're just going to make sure that funding is used well to achieve it.
And for the more distant water fleet, we recently seen a tweet from the UK Fisheries Limited highlighting significant production in the cod available to them and to other, well, it's to them. So we're looking at they're having 4,075 tons for the current year. Given the serious implications of the quota reductions, we've seen poor negotiations and after Brexit. Why is this continuing?
I mean, we've got a few things on card, haven't we? We've got we failed in the first year after Brexit. We failed to do a deal on cod with Norway. We lost the vast majority of the distant waters fleet's quota in one fell swoop there, showing just how brilliant we are at negotiating things. We did very, very poorly out of that, and that was devastating. And then more recently, North Sea cod, IC's advice being rearranged around a new substock model has led to some strange outcomes with stocks growing. The physical number of fish in the sea increases, but because of the way that different substocks are now being linked in the IC's model, we're having TAC reductions proposed, and I think we're braced for more of those this year because of the modelling. We take issue with how those models have been developed and operated, but we are kind of caught there between our inability to negotiate a better deal with Norway and IC's advice. That produces some slightly irrational outcomes where stocks get bigger, but we behave as though they're shrinking in the advice that's given because of the way we link different populations in a mathematical model. So cod is in a bad place right now. We need a more rational view of it. And the IC's point is an interesting one, isn't it? That every year the IC's advice comes out, and there's a cohort of people who say we have to treat the headline advice, that one scenario, we have to treat as the word of God and never deviate from it. And then this year IC's publishes a report highlighting the environmental problems caused by offshore wind and the negative impacts of that. And we've just ignored that. That's just one view. Scientists don't know everything. Let's build more wind farms. There's a double standard at play there, isn't there? IT is infallible as long as it says the things that people kind of think it ought to say. But
well, it's all now down to what people want to hear. They don't want to hear that offshore wind farms are bad, and they want to hear that fishing cod is bad. So the government's only going to have ears for what's popular.
Yeah, it's a depressing thing, isn't it? The phrase that's been used about us living in the post-truth age seems to be right. It's about how you feel about something rather than the actuality of something. And that's a dangerous place to be making public policy because opinion is fickle and easily manipulated. And the whole idea that politicians need to follow public opinion on everything and seek it out, firstly, as though they get an accurate view of public opinion. And secondly, as though that was the right thing to do. I remember the highly protected marine area consultation a few years ago, looking at banning all human activity from a few different areas of English waters. And I remember it targeted the area around Lindisfarne, which was, again, a bit of a poster child for the conservation groups because people can find it on a map, basically. They know where it is, it's got a name, and let's ban it there. And that ultimately wasn't progressed because there was huge outcry from local people for whom this would have been devastating. Businesses would have been closed down, even doubts about whether people could walk their dog on their own beach. It would have been devastating. And ultimately, government didn't go ahead with it. But the vast majority of public responses to that consultation were in favour of a complete closure of that area to all human activity. And yet when the results were published of that consultation, almost every single one of the thousands of responses in favour of that ban came from an urban postcode, most of them in the southeast. People who'd never visited an area were absolutely sure they had a strong opinion on what should be done with it. I don't know anything, but I reckon some stuff about it, and that's what we should do. And the other example I always like to put is that back in the day, the British government banned or revoked the death penalty for crimes. And at the time when government did that, surveys said that more than 70% of people in the UK were in favour of the death penalty. But politicians of the day didn't feel they had to follow public opinion. They felt a moral duty to lead at times and say that, in my genuine opinion, this is the wrong thing to do. And they banned it. And within a couple of years, more than 70% of the British population was absolutely against it. Politicians can lead opinion and not just follow it. Politicians can stand up for a principle and not just follow the herd, follow the loudest voices, which are paid for by whoever has the money to fund an advertising campaign, a film, or whatever it may be. We need a little bit more courage and honesty from our politicians, rather than just chasing the likes.
Well, there is a danger there where you elect your local representative, and your local representative is to go there to represent the views of your constituency. But we seem to have a generation of politicians, and whether it's the people electing them themselves or whatever it is, but when they get in, they really don't have policy. They're making it up as they go along.
It's almost as though we're in a permanent campaign, isn't it? As though they're constantly campaigning. Well, you've won. You don't need to campaign anymore. Now you need to get on with the business of governing, and that involves informing yourself about things. It involves making informed decisions and actually not just taking whatever your constituents think and saying that's what should be done, but actually having a dialogue and telling people about things and reaching an informed conclusion. I mean, my goodness, there's vast areas of human experience and public policy that I know nothing about. You shouldn't ask me about them. I haven't got a clue. You shouldn't be letting me have a say in management of a whole variety of industries. That's ridiculous. I know nothing. So why do we allow management of the fishing industry to be handed over to likes and clicks? Because that's really, really easily manipulated, isn't it? By a canny piece of marketing or a film made with no reference to the fishing industry or fishermen. But we'll have a big glitzy launch party and we'll invite a Spice Girl to the premiere, and everybody thinks it must be true. It must be true because somebody on the television says so. That's no way to run a country. It's no way to run a business, never mind a country.
Well, yeah, you think that the British public would have been aware that you can't always trust whatever every celebrity or who they are or what they say they are. So you know, that lesson should have been learned, but unfortunately it doesn't seem to be that way. But let's move on from politicians and celebrities to the outcome of the recent arbitration or Permanent Court of Arbitrations regarding the sand eel case. On one side, you have the Danish claiming that it's a victory for the EU, and the other side, you have politicians in England claiming that it's a victory for English conservation. Who won? Because it's slightly out there, isn't it?
And amazing. In both sides, you get a legal case, and both sides come out and say they won it. It's fascinating, and I'm very much kind of looking at this from the outside. I don't have a dog in the fight. We don't catch sand eels, so we have no kind of no axe to grind here. Yeah, UK says it's won because this is effectively using the trade mechanism of the TCA to bring a dispute. No trade measures imposed. On the other hand, Europe says it's won because the UK lost on the proportionality point. The idea being that the UK has the power to make regulations like this as long as they are proportionate and there was no assessment of the proportionality of the move. I am still kind of working out the implications of this, and I think everyone else is too. I think the dust has settled and we're now starting to think, well, what does that mean for future, not just this case, but for future measures? And does it, in fact, privilege European fishers over British fishers in British waters? Because government doesn't have to be proportionate towards us, because we don't have a right to fish in British waters. We have permission to fish and we have to buy a license to fish. We don't have a right to fish. Have we just created a right for European boats to fish in British waters? And if so, that means those rights can only be infringed where it's proportionate to do so. And how many of the things that our government does to us are proportionate. When we propose to create a bunch of MPAs in areas that haven't been monitored in some cases for over 30 years, where we have limited evidence for even the existence of the feature we claim to protect, and no studies on whether the things that fishermen are actually doing will actually impact those features if they're present, and never mind the fact that those features usually only occupy a very small part of the area that's proposed to be closed. Is that proportionate? I'm not even sure it's rational, never mind proportionate, and that's a prior legal test they need to satisfy. So that proportionality point has implications domestically for us, certainly has implications for how European fishing businesses might want to respond to other things that the British government is doing to restrict fishing in British waters. And I'm really not sure that our government has thought through what that means. Well, possibly they have, but they're certainly not telling us if they have. The sand deal arbitration is going to be the gift that keeps on giving, I think. There's going to be complications of that for a long time still to come. And I don't know what the answer is going to be in terms of what rights that creates and what enforceable permissions European businesses now have in British waters, and vice versa.
From my reading of it, it seems to be that if the UK is saying that it has won, but yet now the European Union has won, it seems to be saying to me that there will be a more EU has more enforceable rights and UK waters than maybe what it had previously.
Yeah, I think that's right. And if the UK has won and that the rules haven't been struck down, it just has to carry out a proportionality assessment to satisfy that test. Well, it's still got to carry out the assessment. And it can't prejudge that assessment, otherwise they'll be back in court. It's going to have to do it genuinely. What if they do that and find it wasn't proportionate? That actually the IC's advice shows that that stock is pretty strong and the whole TAC isn't caught every year. So is it proportionate to ban it? I don't know if we can still say that or not. I genuinely don't know all the arguments because thankfully it's one fishery that isn't a personal headache because we don't catch it. But it's surely not a given that that will be considered a proportionate action if they ever get around to doing the assessment.
Well, it's the knock-on effect from the ruling more so than the ruling itself. That's the issue here, like, you know.
Absolutely.
So moving forward, especially under this new agreement, there was nothing even was it even discussed in this new agreement what it'll mean for both fleets going forward, or was there an agreement made to say, okay, let's start with a better way of dealing with these things? But no, it's a continuation of the status quo.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no new agreement reached. I think this is just stacking up problems for the future. That new relationship with the EU, or going back to the old relationship between the EU and the UK, being done through the specialised committee means that there is no agreement, no terms that we can scrutinise, we can examine and understand what that means going forward. So by not making this a new part of the treaty, governing the relationship by doing it through that kind of backdoor route, I think we're stacking up complications for the future.
Well, Mike, we've come full circle. We're back to the EU-UK fisheries deal.
No, I think we've covered a lot of ground there, and look, it's complicated, difficult times for the industry. I realise I've sounded very negative throughout that, and I don't want to. I would love to be talking about new projects to get more young people into the industry, to all the stuff we're involved in around bycatch mitigation and new technology to improve the selectivity of gear, to reduce carbon emissions. I'd like to be talking about the fact that we are still the lowest carbon way of putting protein on a plate that's readily available to us in this country, that it's wild, free range, locally produced food that's really, really healthy. And that's what we should be talking about. And isn't it depressing that the policy choices that are being made by government keep taking that opportunity away from us? I talked at the SAGB conference last week, which is a really good event. Loads of good presentations. And I was asked to talk about spatial squeeze there. And kind of the conclusion I reached is, in some ways, I wish we'd stop talking about spatial squeeze because it makes it sound like some sort of a force of nature, some natural phenomenon that's just happening to us and we've got to cope with it. Because it's not. It's the result of a series of conscious but ill thought through and not coordinated decisions. We need to be talking about the kind of Fishermen are not at risk from spatial squeeze. They're at risk of I don't know, political deprioritization or something. And that's not snappy enough to put on the side of a bus, but some better phrase that shows that these are choices that are being made. I wish I was talking about better choices, or at least maybe government just stopping choosing. So just stop kicking us while we're down for 5 minutes, and perhaps we could start doing something positive. That's what I want to be talking about, because there's so many ideas out there and so many enthusiastic people. We need a breathing space to tap into that and do something good.
Well, it's probably another podcast for us.
I hope so. Hopefully we're still here to talk about it. I hope so.
Because we should be focusing on the positive things, but the trouble is, as you say, it's negative things coming down the road from government and from these NGOs and that are squeezing the life out of the business, like, you know. So
totally.
But we will do another one, and we will talk about the positive aspects of it.
The good stuff. I keep saying this to ministers: give us some good news. Give me a reason to be pleased about what you're doing, and we'll shout it from the rooftops. We want to be doing something good. And goodness me, you know, what we do is so necessary. We produce food and provide jobs in places where nobody else is providing jobs. Why are we and government not just shouting about how good it is that we can do more to make this even better and even more sustainable? Let's focus on that. Very hard to move past the current stuff, but we will have to in the end. The fishing industry and colleagues in Shetland will tell you there's evidence of fishing to feed communities from 6,000 years ago in Shetland. We've been doing this a little while. We've got to make sure we're still doing it. We will at some point move through the current round of nonsense and get on to doing what we do, feeding people. Only come right down to it, you cannot eat a wind turbine.
Right, Mike. Thank you very much. And we'll chat to you again. Take care.
Take care. Thanks a lot.
If you like this episode or any of our other episodes, please hit the subscribe button and show your support for independent news in the fishing industry. Thank you.